Well, so glad you guys are here with us for week 5 of Asking for a Friend. Man, this has been such a great series, and really kind of the whole idea behind this series has been that there are things in our lives, there's topics, there's issues that we face, there's decisions we have to make that for one reason or another, we don't feel comfortable bringing them up, right? We may feel a little shame about it or embarrassed about it, or maybe we feel like we should have the answer and have it all figured out, and so we don't want to bring it up. And what happens is oftentimes when you want to bring up a topic that you're really interested in, but you're not comfortable bringing it up, we disguise it, right? We kind of hide it behind the whole idea, well, I'm asking for a friend, but everybody knows you're really asking for yourself, right? And so over the last couple of weeks as a church, we've been looking at different topics that I think have been incredibly relevant to our lives, issues that are, we all face, issues that we're all dealing with at some levels. We've talked about addiction and addiction issues, and we've talked about anger and kind of how that fits into it. We've talked about end-of-life decisions that some of us are facing for family members right now who are near the end of their days. And so it has just been so helpful. And if you want to catch up on the series, if you've missed any of it, you can always go to our website, lcbcchurch.com. But the other thing that we've done, and I just want to point this out to you, it's in your program, and so you don't need to write this down. But if you go to lcbcchurch.com/asking for a friend, we've put, I think, an incredible set of resources there for you that take the conversation about the topics that we've been covering in all of our gatherings and takes it a little bit further and just gives you resources, gives you ways that you can take it a little bit further. And I think in particular today, this website, and you remembering this, again, it's in your program, so you got it there. I think for some of you, you're gonna definitely wanna know this because of some of the things that today's content is going to stir up in you and some next steps that you're going to wanna take. And so let me tell you the question that we're gonna talk about today. Let me tell you the asking for a friend question we wanna dive into. How do I get through depression and anxiety? So, it's gonna be a party for the next couple minutes. How do I get through depression and anxiety? Of course, I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for a friend here. But how do you navigate this? Now, my guess is I do not need to lay out a case for why this is incredibly relevant to talk about right now. But just in case I do, let me just point out a few things. Some of you probably knew this already, but 40% of Americans report being more anxious than they were a year ago. Which means, just kind of bring it home. If you look around the room right now, 40% of the people around you, almost half of the people around you say that they're more anxious today than they were a year ago. Some of you want to look around right now, but that just brings up all sorts of anxiety, and so you're not. So anyways, here's the next one. Depression rates have risen 33% since 2013. The last 5 years, depression rates have risen 33%. Here's another one. 1 in every 8 Americans over the age of 12 reported recent antidepressant use. Which means there's a lot of people around us right now who are reaching out for help, just saying, man, I need help addressing some of this stuff that's going on when it comes to depression and anxiety. This one's striking. Suicide rates have increased by 28% in the last 2 decades. And when you hear something incredibly striking is that in this spike of 28% in the last 2 decades, suicide rates in girls, between the ages of 10 and 19 has spiked just between 2010 and 2016 has spiked 70%. Now, I'm not trying to scare you with all this. I'm just trying to paint a picture and set the stage for why we gotta talk about this. Because the reality is that every single person here right now, we have been touched by this issue, this depression, anxiety issue in some way, this mental health issue in some way, shape, or form. And for some of you, you are directly sort of involved in this because it's you. And you've been in the grip, or maybe you're currently in the grip of this, and you're wanting to know sort of how to navigate this thing. For others of you, it was in the past. For others of you, it's coming at some point. And then for all of us, my guess is you don't have to think very long to think about 1 or 2 relationships removed from you of people who are struggling with this. And so I want to talk today about how do we navigate this, whether we're in the middle of it or we're walking beside someone who's struggling with it. How do we find our way out of this? How do we navigate this? In order to do that, in order to guide the conversation today, I just want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story that is an ancient story from the scriptures. And it's, to me, in my opinion, it's one of the most fascinating stories in all of the Bible. It's one of the most fascinating stories in all the Bible, and it is incredibly helpful, and I think you're gonna find it incredibly helpful for talking about this topic. And so I would love for you to turn to 1 Kings chapter 19. If you don't have a Bible, there's some of the seats around you. If you open up your mobile device, whatever, scroll, whatever you need to do to 1 Kings chapter 19, because I wanna look at this story together with you. I think the implications are incredibly helpful for any of us who are walking through depression, anxiety, or wanting to walk beside someone who is. Let me just give you a little bit of context real quick. This story is about a guy named Elijah. And Elijah was a prophet. And a prophet is basically someone who God set apart to speak for him. And so prophets were incredibly committed to God. You will not find anyone in the scriptures like as fiercely devoted to God as Elijah. This man is passionately, fiercely committed to following God. He's a prophet. He's been set apart to speak for God. And there's this moment in chapter 18. Chapter 18 of 1 Kings is such a great chapter. If you get a chance at some point today, go read it because it's well worth your time. But I'll give you a quick summary real quick. Elijah literally has a mountaintop moment because he has all these people around him at that time who were worshiping this God that they thought was a God, who actually is no God at all, but this God that they called Baal. And Elijah wants to tell them, and he's trying to prove to them, look, Baal is no God. There is no other God but the one true God. Baal is no God. And he says, you know what I'll do? Here, I dare you. Let me throw out a challenge. So he throws out this challenge to him. He says, here's what we'll do. You put a sacrifice on the altar and you get your most spiritual people together who are committed to Baal, and you guys pray and let's see what Baal does. Let's see if Baal consumes the sacrifice. So they do this and they put this sacrifice on the altar, and 450 prophets of Baal, they get around and they dance and they do all their shenanigans and they cut themselves and they pray and they beg Baal to do something. Baal never does it because Baal's no God, right? Nothing happens. Then Elijah's like, okay, my turn. Elijah puts his sacrifice on the altar and he just, in front of everyone, just prays this one simple prayer. He says, God, please, it's your time, show off, just show them that you're the one true God. And immediately this fire, this lightning from heaven comes down, consumes this sacrifice. And everybody around knows Baal is no God at all. It's been a lie the whole time. And Elijah's God is the one true God, the only true God. And so some of them begin to turn to this one true God that Elijah worships. Now, this doesn't make everybody happy. In fact, there's a queen, her name is Jezebel. I'm telling you, you don't want Jezebel showing up at your family picnic this afternoon, right? I mean, this is not a good thing. And so Jezebel is the queen. She's embarrassed because she's been worshiping Baal and she's been telling everybody to worship Baal. And so she's furious about this. And so she utters this threat to Elijah and she says, by this time tomorrow, you will be dead. I will make sure of that. And that's where we pick up in the story as Elijah's just gotten this threat. Look what it says in verse 3 of chapter 19. It says, Elijah was afraid. You would have been too. And he fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. So he's running. And then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and he prayed that he might what? Die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Now you think about this description of Elijah for a second. This man of God, this fiercely committed follower of God. And here he is, honestly, with all the markers of depression. He's got all these symptoms of depression in this moment, like this deep grief and sadness has washed over him. I mean, think about it. He's withdrawn. He's alone now. He's, as you're about to find in a couple of verses later, he's apparently not eating anymore. He has this hopelessness and sense of despair that is weighing in on him at this moment to the point where he doesn't want to live anymore. He's been burdened, overwhelmed with this sense of grief and despair and sadness. You know, one of the things I find interesting is that I think culturally, at least, we tend to see sadness as a negative emotion. You ever thought about that? That you have joy and, elation and contentment and then sadness. And if we were to kind of put all these emotions on a scale, we would say that sadness and grief, that these are not good things, that these are not things you really want to feel. In fact, how many of us have ever done this? How many of us have ever been in a conversation with someone and they explain how sad they are and something in us wants to rescue them from that? We want to help them. And so we say things like, well, it's going to be okay. It's not going to always be like this. Things are going to turn around. There's a brighter day ahead. It's not always going to be like this. You ever thought about why don't we feel the need to do that when someone says, man, I am so happy. I'm so filled with joy about this. We never say, that's not going to last, right? It's not always going to be so happy. I just want you to know that. And yet when someone expresses sadness, we treat that as if that is a negative emotion that we need to, I don't want you feeling that. We don't want to feel that. And so no one tells us this, we just pick up on it. We begin to stuff sadness down. We don't want to feel sadness and grief. And so we learn because it's bad, it's a negative thing, so we stuff it down. The problem is when you stuff sadness, it's not like the emotion goes away, it just gets stored. And it's almost like the more we stuff our sadness, it has this compounding effect in our life to the point where it just gets hardened up inside of us. I'm not trying to stereotype here, but I'm about to. But I think there's some backing for this. Because I think culturally we have this sort of, if this is for men and women, I think we have this idea that sadness is a negative emotion we want to push down. But I think this is particularly true for men. And again, there's backing for this. You can go and you can Google all sorts of sociological research that has been done that shows that girls on average, I don't know if you knew this or not, but girls on average, when they're little girls and when they're in social settings, that little girls are rewarded for articulating feelings and for relational connectedness. They're rewarded for that. On the other hand, they're usually punished or discouraged from assertiveness. And that's a whole nother message because that's just wrong. We can talk about that later. And then on the other side, boys, on the other hand, complete opposite. Little boys are typically, again in social settings, are typically rewarded for assertiveness, but they're discouraged or punished socially from relational connectedness, from articulating feelings. I don't know if you knew this or not, but you know that there have been studies that have shown this, that infant girls are spoken to more than infant boys. Now, no one's choosing to do this. This is just sort of happening at this subconscious sort of level. And yet, what does this do? It tells men, we pick up this idea that we don't talk, that we stuff. That what it means to be a man partly is you're assertive, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily connected. And so we don't even know half the time how to articulate what's going on. And again, I know that women struggle with this too, but I'm just saying this has been proven sociologically by research that this is particularly true for men. Probably about 9 years ago or so, I was at a personal level, it was one of the darkest seasons of my life. And there were a lot of transitions happening in my life at the time that had just disrupted me in a significant way. And so I was beginning, in particular, my anger was, I was just angry all the time. And it was directly affecting the people who were closest to me. In particular, my family. And so I knew there was this moment for me that I got to do something about this. I've got to talk. I can't keep stuffing whatever this thing is down. And so I started seeing a counselor again. I've seen a counselor so many times in my life. Could not recommend that highly enough. And I knew I needed to talk to someone. And so I'm talking to my counselor. And one day my counselor says to me, he says, "Man, Jason, you are so depressed." I was like, "I'm not depressed. I went to work today. And I'm a pastor, by the way. I'm not depressed. I haven't drawn the shades down in my bedroom, and I don't sit in my bed all day crying. I'm not depressed. I haven't withdrawn and cut off every relationship. I'm not depressed." And then my counselor was like, oh, I see. See, you think you're not depressed because you have a really jacked up understanding of what depression is. And then he began to describe to me the difference between overt depression and covert depression. And it changed everything. Because overt depression it's sort of those stereotypical symptoms of depression that you would probably think of, that most of us would think of, right? So overt depression would be, sadness, and we can't just sort of crying when we don't even really want to cry, and we withdraw from other people, and we pull the shades down, and we don't even feel like getting out of bed in the morning, all that kind of stuff, right? That's overt depression. But there's also covert depression, where the symptoms show themselves in a masked way. Covert depression, the signs of covert depression are expressions of anger, sometimes spousal abuse, alcohol abuse, compulsive gambling, workaholism. In other words, all these things that we tend to do to mask and numb this deep sense of sadness that we live with. We cannot, this is for every single person here right now, we cannot move toward the healing while stuffing our sadness. You can't do it. God didn't design our souls for that. We can't move towards healing while stuffing our sadness. And culturally, we've bought in and we've been placed this idea that sadness is a negative emotion, so we don't bring it out. But culturally, that's true, but there's one more layer that's added on for some of us that makes it toxic. And for some of us, not only do we have the cultural it's not even a cultural norm that we don't talk about sadness because that's a negative emotion. Some of us, where it gets really toxic, is you've got this religious layer that's been placed on top of that. Because some of us grew up in religious circles, or you grew up in a Christian home, or you grew up in a church somewhere, or whatever, I don't even know, and you had someone tell you that part of what it means to be a Christian is to always be full of joy. And they use biblical words to back it up, and they say, man, we're more than conquerors, and that we can choose joy. And all these things are true in one level, but what it did was it left you with the sense that you can't be in the throes of depression, and you can't experience anxiety and still really be a person committed to faith, that those two things don't really go hand in hand. And this is why I love stories like Elijah's. Because you've got this man of deep, committed, passionate faith who's in the grip of depression and anxiety. And he doesn't know where to go. And Elijah's not the only one. The Bible is full of these examples. I mean, look at some of these. This is a psalm. This is Psalm 88. Psalms were prayers that were written. This is a prayer that was written to God. The darkness is my closest friend. Do you think the writer's depressed? The answer is yes, by the way. Here's another one. This was written by King David in a psalm, Psalm 6. All night I flood my bed with weeping, drenching it with my tears. Now remember, David wrote that. Do you know what else was said about David by God himself? God said, David is a man after my own heart. In other words, out of all the men in the world, that man understands me. That man gets me. I love that man right here. And apparently, the man after God's own heart could barely get out of bed some mornings. Here's another one. This is Jeremiah, who's a prophet. Why was I ever born? My entire life has been filled with trouble, sorrow, and shame. Here's the last one. He was despised and rejected, a man of what? Sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. Now, do you know who that was written about? Do you know who that's describing right there? Jesus. A man of sorrows, Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, God in the flesh, is described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with our deepest grief. And Elijah finds himself falling in line with this long history of men and women who have gone ahead of him, who have been deeply, passionately committed to God, and yet feel stuck in depression and anxiety. And Elijah's depression takes him to the extreme. And he's suicidal. You remember the prayer that he prayed? I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. In other words, Elijah's saying, the only reason I'm not taking my own life is because I'm in a desert and I don't have a way to do it. It's the only thing missing right now is the opportunity. And so he does the next best thing and he asks God to do it for him. Now, let me just pause for a second and talk about suicide. Because the truth is, some of us here today have been told a lie about suicide. And some of us grew up in religious circles where you were told this lie, and it is so destructive. And the lie that some of us have been told about suicide is that anyone who commits suicide goes straight to hell. That it is some unforgivable sin. I want you to know nothing could be further from the truth. I want you to know that if you were to read the Bible from the first page to the last page a million times, you will never see that in the Bible. That is nowhere in the Bible. That was made up by some person some time ago. I don't know why, but it has made its way into our culture. and it's not true. The work of Jesus Christ on the cross, Jesus, and what he did to pay for our sins, what Jesus did to bring us back to God, that work covers everything. His grace is big enough to swallow up everything that we have done, including suicide. For those of us who have placed our faith in Jesus Christ, for those of us who have trusted in the work that Jesus Christ did on the cross, what we do or don't do is not what gets us back to God. It's what Jesus did. And I have friends and family friends over the course of my life who were as devoted to Jesus Christ as anyone. And they took their own lives. And I just think we ought to be real careful about judging and assigning judgment and why someone would do that and dismissing it with cliched answers and judging why someone would even get to that point. I don't think if someone gets to the point where they're even considering taking their own life, I don't think it has anything to do with selfishness. I think if someone gets to the point where they're considering taking their own life, it is because they have determined, it's like standing at the edge of a burning building and you've got the flames behind you. And you've got a jump that will mean certain death in front of you, and yet at some point you go, the terror of dying by jumping is less than the terror of dying by the flames. And so I think we ought to have a little empathy for how someone could get to that place. And if you're here today, and I know that someone's here, I know that someone is here today, and you're considering taking your own life. You've thought about it. And for some of you, you've thought about it a lot, and you're further down the road. And if that's you, if I could get with you one-on-one, I would. Just consider this our one-on-one moment right now. I am begging you to reconsider. I'm begging you to reconsider. To not make a permanent decision based on temporary circumstances. And I know for a fact, because I've walked with families through this, I know for a fact your family and friends would beg you to reconsider. To not make a permanent decision based on temporary circumstances. And I know that you cannot see your way out, and I know it's hard to see that there might be light on the other side at some point of this season that you're in, but I promise you there is. And you don't have to see a way out in order for you to reach out. And I'm praying for you today, and I've been praying for you leading up to today, that the power of the Spirit of God would work its way into your heart to rescue you and to free you from those thoughts and to bring you life that right now you don't even think is possible. You're not alone. Elijah understands. Elijah is open and he's honest and he is so raw before God and says, I don't even want to live. He opens up to God. And God's response to Elijah is just so beautiful. Look what God says and does. Look at verse 5. Then Elijah laid down and he slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and he told him, get up and eat. He looked around and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and he drank and he laid down again. And then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead of you will be too much. So he got up and he ate and he drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And there he came to a cave where he spent the night. Man, I love this response by God. This tells us so much about God's character, doesn't it? That Elijah has just said, God, I don't even want to live. God, just take my life. Then Elijah comes clean and says, I'm in the throes of depression, anxiety. I'm in the throes of this thing. I don't even see a way out. And God does not respond with a rebuke. God doesn't say, how dare you, Elijah? I created you and now you want to take your life. How dare you, Elijah? You know I've set you apart to be a prophet and now you don't even want to. How dare you? How could you? God doesn't do that. God cares for him. God gives him space to heal. That's what God does in response. God tenderly provides for him. There's no shaming. There's no condemning. There's no rebuking. When you think about what God does, God feeds him. He gives him a meal. God gives him rest. He gives him space to just rest. God gets Elijah to talk. He opens up, right? Because Elijah's praying. He's talking to him. And God gets Elijah up and walking. He says, you got a journey. So get up. Let's get moving. And part of why I love this is because God this just displays the infinite wisdom of God. Because anybody who's a clinical psychologist would say that these 4 things right here are critical to mental health. That these 4 aspects are critical to us developing mental health. A diet, right? Having a right diet, that plays a significant part in the mental health. Rest, sleep patterns, plays a significant role in mental health. And in particular, if you're wondering, it's not just what time you go to bed at night. That's less important that you wake up at the same time every day, that does something to your body and for your body, but he gives some rest, getting the proper amount of sleep. God gets Elijah to talk, counseling, opening it up, not stuffing the sadness, but getting it out so that you can process, getting it out so that you can have perspective outside of yourself when you feel like everything is so hopeless. That's what seeing a counselor does. And then he gets Elijah up and walking. He says, get up, come on. Gotta start walking. He gets him exercising. And there's a study, again, there's all sorts of research about this. You can find this anywhere online. There was one study in particular, a British study that was done, and they found that a regular aerobic exercise can have the same effect as antidepressants. There's something that it does for us. And he says, get up, come on, let's start releasing some of those endorphins. Isn't this just brilliant? The wisdom of God. To know what we need most, to know what Elijah needs most, to know what we need most to walk towards healing. And he gives them this comprehensive sort of approach to finding healing. He gives exactly Elijah what he needs to heal. And what God does next, I think has so many implications for any of us. If you're here today and you're walking along someone, or you have a family member or a friend or someone that you love that's struggling with depression, anxiety, this next section has so much to say to us. Look what happens next. Look at verse 11. So Elijah's in the cave at this moment, right? And so God shows up again and says, go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord wasn't in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard that, he wrapped his face in his cloak and he went out and he stood at the entrance of the cave. Listen, I know that if you're here today and you have someone close to you that is in their own cave right now. And they're struggling and they're not the same person that they used to be, and you know that, and they know it too. I know that you want so badly for them to come out of that cave. And I know that you're scared, and I know that you're fearful about what they might do, or that they're just not who they used to be. I know. But do you know what's not helpful? What's not helpful is when we just create a big windstorm and an earthquake and we bring the fire and we put our finger in their face and we say, can't you just snap out of this? Just choose not to be sad. Just choose happy thoughts. And we throw these cliched, simple answers at really complicated issues. And it's fascinating to me that it wasn't the big, loud windstorm, and it wasn't the fire, and it wasn't the shaking of the earthquake that brought Elijah out of the cave. It was a gentle whisper. How close do you have to be to someone to hear a whisper? Close, right? Intimate, side by side. And if we want the people we love the most to begin to take a step out of the cave, it might start by us getting side by side with them and just listening, providing a meal for them, saying, help me understand. I don't understand it all, but just help me. Let me know. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me where you are with things right now. And consistently showing up to create space for them to rest and to heal. To lean in and to whisper and say, I'm not leaving you. You know, as a church, I think this has implications for us as well. Because I think as a church, we have a God-given responsibility to be a place where people who are in the cave of depression and anxiety can heal. To be a place where people can slowly begin to walk out of the cave here because they know it's safe. Where people here at our church can reemerge from their cave and not be judged for where they've been. I think as a church, we have a responsibility to put the character of God on display for people. And the character of God in this moment is a God who leans in and draws close, doesn't withdraw from people just because their issues are complicated, but draws in and leans in tighter and gives them space to heal. He meets Elijah where he's at in the cave, right? He meets him there and he leans in. But although God meets Elijah where he's at in that cave of his depression, God doesn't leave him there. He invites him into something better. He says there's hope. Look what he does next. Look at verse 15. It says, then the Lord told him, he says, Elijah, here, I've got something for you. I want you to go back the same way you came and travel to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive there, I want you to anoint Hazael to be king of Aram. And then I want you to anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, to be king of Israel. And then, Elijah, I'm going to give you a partner. I want you to anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from the town of Abel Mahola, and I want him to replace you as my prophet. Now think about this for a second. God is giving Elijah something incredible here. What does he do? First of all, he gives Elijah work that matters. He says, Elijah, I'm not done with you. Elijah, I just want you to know, I know you're in this season. I know you're in your cave. I know you can't see a way out right now. I know you feel like the darkness that you're in will never end. But I just want you to know, I got a job for you. I am not done with you. And if you're here today and you are in your own cave of depression and mental health issues and anxiety, I want you to know God is not saying that he's done with you. God is not done with you. He has a purpose for your life still. He has something that he has uniquely designed you to do. He has work that matters that he wants to invite you into. And says, there is love I want to pour out in this world. There is work I want to do in this world, and I won't use, and I can't use, and I'm not going to use anybody but you. And your story will be part of it. He says, so Elijah, go, anoint those kings, because no one else can do that. Go. He's not giving up. The second thing he gives them is relationships. He says, I'm going to give you Elisha. And yes, that's going to confuse everybody from history on forward now. Elisha and Elijah, but they'll get over it. He says, so here's the thing. Elisha is going to be your partner. He's going to be your right-hand man. He's going to walk with you. He gives them meaningful relationships. And if you're here and you're in your own cave, relationships and connectedness will be your way out. And as a church, let us be that for you. Let us be family for you. Let your life group, let the team you serve on open up and let them come around you and support you. And the last thing that God gives Elijah, he gives him a choice to bring meaning to the pain. That's always our choice, right? Is whenever we're in these moments, no matter how dark it is, we have a choice whether or not we will bring meaning to it. Every now and then when we're in the darkest seasons, our question tends to be, how will I get out of this? But God turns that question and says, the most important question is, what will I get out of this? Because there's something that you will learn in this season, no matter how dark it is, that you can one day use to bring meaning to others. And we know Elijah does that, don't we? How do we know Elijah made that choice? To use this darkest moment to bring meaning to others. You know how we know? Because here we are 2,900 years later and we still have this story, which means what? Elijah went and told this story because no one else was with him in that desert, were they? So the only way we know about this is Elijah willingly saying, I've been in a cave and I want you to know it won't last forever. That's why I love verse 19. The first three words of verse 19 is our last thing we're looking at. It says, so Elijah went. He went. I love one translation says this, he departed from there. He took a step. He walked out of the cave. And it all started with his willingness to open up, didn't it? That's where it all started, with his willingness to bring it out, to open up. Would you be willing to open up? Would you be courageous enough and brave enough? You have it in you to open up. For some of you, you need to go to that website today. You need to look at some of the resources in the counseling referral list. You need to call the church and we will help. But it's time to open up, to depart from there. Our church is wanting to walk with you and to point you to God, to the God who can heal your soul. And let me just say, no one is more qualified to heal your soul than the one who created it. No one. Which is why the words of Jesus are so powerful in Matthew 11, where he said, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Now, who could dare say that to anybody else? I will give you rest. Who could dare say that other than the man of sorrows, acquainted with our deepest grief? Jesus, the Son of God, who says, I know pain, and I know loss, and I know darkness of a cave. Jesus, who also says, but I also know, I know when you will laugh again, even though you don't see that right now. I know when you will laugh from the gut. That day's coming. And I know where life will be full of color again, even though you can't see that right now. Jesus says, I know. So open up. Let me pray for us. God, we are so, well, first of all, God, I just feel like we are so encouraged by the reality that these stories are in the Bible, that these stories reveal to us who you are and who we can be. Thank you that there is no one more qualified to heal the needs of our soul more than you who created our soul. Thank you, Jesus, that you can heal us in the ways that we need the most, not from some place up far away from a distance, but rather you are the man of sorrows. You have lived this, you know, and you are uniquely qualified to heal us. Jesus, for those of us who are here today and we are in our own caves, I pray that maybe today we hear you whispering. Maybe today we hear you whispering and we take just one step out of that cave into the light. I pray for those of us who need the courage to open up, you would give us that courage. And as a church, I pray that we would continue to be a place of healing, continue to be a place that is safe for people to reemerge out of caves and not be judged, but to be given a meal, to be given hope, to be listened to. Thank you that you know everything about us and your love never ends. Pray that in your name, Jesus. Amen.